In the noisy Makola market, a barefoot boy whispers, "I just captured a beautiful moment." No one believes him. They call him crazy. But Malik doesn't need a camera to see. When his three-legged dog, Koba, is hurt and his camera breaks, Malik rises with an unbreakable heart. This is a story about light in darkness, memory, and love beyond words. Before we start, hit subscribe so you won't miss our most touching stories. Malik's story begins in the hidden corners of Makola Market, where light and shadow intertwine and where a boy learns to see the world with his own heart. The day begins with a slow-motion shot of Makola Market just before the heat hits full stride. Vendors shout over each other, the air thick with red dust and the scent of fried kelewel. In the crowd, a boy walks barefoot, his clothes a patchwork of old shirts and frayed trousers. He moves without urgency, but with purpose. His eyes scan like a lens, pausing, focusing, capturing. "I just took a beautiful picture," he mutters softly, stopping beside a tomato seller whose child is crying on her lap. The woman stares at him. "What picture? You have no camera?" A group of boys nearby snicker. "Malik the mad chimp," one says. "He takes pictures in his head." They laugh, but Malik doesn't. He lowers his gaze slightly and smiles, not at them, but at something only he can see. Just a few feet away, a goat nuzzles an old woman's hand. She laughs, toothless and delighted. Malik watches intently. Left frame, warm light. Subject, woman's hand. Detail, goat's tongue, moisture reflecting sun. He whispers to himself. The sun hits the tin roofs above, glinting off crates of dried fish and globs of melting soap. Malik continues walking. A cart topples nearby, and a burst of fresh fish slaps the ground, silver slippery shimmering under the sun. Everyone groans. Malik stops. "Shutter speed slow," he says. "Capture the arc, the splash." He doesn't own a phone. He doesn't own shoes. But when people ask where he lives, he says, "Inside moments." Beside him walks a dog, scruffy, limping slightly with one torn ear. The dog sticks close. He doesn't beg, doesn't bark. But when Malik eats, the dog eats. When Malik sleeps beneath the abandoned stall by the onion vendors, the dog curls beside him, back to back. His name is Koba. Malik named him after a character in a book he never read, but once overheard someone speak of loyal broken, but still brave. At the far end of the market, a fight breaks out over prices. Someone shouts, a basin gets kicked, the smell of gari dust rises. Malik turns his head, but doesn't intervene. Instead, he lifts an invisible camera to his eye and whispers, "Conflict in blur." Foreground, chaos. Focus on the crying baby caught in the middle. A few market women scoff at him. "There he goes again," one mutters. Mad Boy thinks he's a photographer, but a younger vendor pauses. "What did he say?" "The crying baby." She turns to look. There is indeed a baby, forgotten for a moment in the shouting, wide-eyed and trembling. Malik kneels quietly and picks up a dropped handkerchief. He offers it to the mother as she rushes back to the child. "Thank you," she says absently. But Malik's not looking at her anymore. He's watching the light shift behind her back as a rain cloud threatens to pass. His lips barely move. Contrast increased. Shadows beginning to stretch. Behind him, Koba growls at a boy who tries to throw a stone. Malik doesn't flinch. And then a voice, old, weary, unseen, rises over the noise. You laugh at him because you don't understand. He sees the world not as it is, but as it's about to vanish. The camera pans to a rooftop above the market where an old man sits. His face is shadowed, only his voice clear. Malik remembers every moment like it matters. He doesn't take photographs. He becomes them. The scene returns to Malik standing still in the middle of the moving market. The crowd rushes around him, but he is still composed, precise, as though waiting for the shutter in his mind to click. Someone shouts his name. "Malik, you coming for food?" He doesn't respond. He whispers one last time, eyes locked on something invisible. "I just took another picture." And Koba, as if he knows, lifts his head to the same spot and stares with him, silent witnesses to a moment no one else noticed. Cut to black. A single voice speaks once more. No one knew what he had lost. They only knew he saw everything as if it had never truly left. The light shifts near the Corley Lagoon. Dull, bruised clouds hang over the water like forgotten dreams. Malik sits at the edge of the rusted footbridge, feet dangling above the black tide. Next to him, a younger boy, barefoot and curious, stares at the ripples without speaking. Malik breaks the silence first. "Want to see a picture?" he says. The boy squints. "You don't have a phone." "I don't need one," Malik replies, tapping his forehead. "It's right here, crystal clear." The boy tilts his head. "What picture?" Malik closes his eyes, breathes. His voice softens into rhythm. A small boy, maybe 5, wearing a blue shirt 3 sizes too big. He's holding a mango seed half chewed. Behind him, an iron gate half open. In the distance, a soldier in uniform walks away. His boots leave muddy prints in the rain. The boy says nothing, but his eyes widen. Something in Malik's voice changes the air. The world slows. Malik continues. The boy's mother stands under the doorway. Her hands tremble, but she smiles. She says, "We'll wait for your father." A pause. Malik opens his eyes again. The water reflects gray, but he never came back. The boy frowns. "Was that you?" Malik shrugs. "It's just a picture." It doesn't have to be anyone. But deep inside, it's always him. The scene cuts to a gentle dissolve, a memory surfacing. Flashback. The edges of the frame soften into black and white. The rain falls softly like hushes from heaven. A younger Malik stands under a crooked zinc roof, soaked. His tiny fingers grip a wooden spoon like it's a sword. A woman, his mother, kneels down, draws him close, wraps a worn shawl around them both. Her face is thin, tired, but radiant in that moment. "Close your eyes," she whispers. "Can you see it?" He nods. "That's your first camera," she says, placing her fingers gently on his temples. "When you remember, you don't lose." The child. Malik closes his eyes again, rain sliding off his brow like tears he refuses to cry. Back to present, Malik remains still by the bridge, the younger boy now fully drawn in. "Did your mother?" Malik cuts him off with a small shake of his head. His voice is steady, but inside the ground is crumbling. "Gone. Fever. Quick." A long silence. Even Koba, who usually sniffs and shifts beside him, is still as if respecting the memory. Malik continues. "They took her picture before they buried her, the only real photo we ever had." He pulls something from his pocket, a torn edge of newspaper. It's not her face. It's a grainy corner, barely anything. But he looks at it like a portrait in gold. "I didn't need the whole photo," he says. "I remember the rest." A wave hits the stone below. The smell of sewage and salt fills the air. "People think I'm crazy because I don't use a camera," Malik says, leaning back. "But what's the difference between a shutter click and a memory? If you never forget the light." The boy says nothing, but his breath has slowed. He's listening now with his entire body. Malik tosses a pebble into the water. "Want to see another?" The boy nods. Malik points to the distant horizon. "Market. 6th, 10 a.m. today. Vendor with yellow scarf. Sun hits her earring. She leans to kiss her son's forehead. He's asleep on a sack of onions. Just before the rooster crowed. He closes his eyes again. I see that picture every time I blink. A bus honks far away. The world rushes on. But here on the bridge, time stands still. Malik finally stands, brushing off the dust. "Let's go. You can't keep a good picture waiting," the boy asks. "But how do you know which ones are good?" Malik doesn't answer directly. He just smiles slightly. "The ones you still see when you close your eyes." As they walk, the sky begins to cry again, light droplets tapping the surface of the lagoon. And as they disappear into the falling rain, the camera lingers on the worn newspaper scrap, fluttering in Malik's pocket. Faint ink, faded paper, but in his mind she is vivid. Alive. Framed perfectly in light, forever. The midday heat presses against Makola like a giant's palm. Shadows sharpen metal glints off canopies, and camera shutters click in rapid succession. Among the crowd, a tall man with a weathered Leica slung across his chest moves with quiet authority. He walks differently, not like a vendor, not like a buyer. He walks like someone watching everything, but giving nothing away. His name is Kwabena Ochere, once a war photographer in Liberia, now Guyana's most respected photojournalist. His images have hung in Paris, Berlin, Accra. But today, he's here for something else, the rhythm of the ordinary, he calls it. The dignity in unnoticed things. He stops by a woman frying yam chips, adjusts his lens, and frames the steam as it curls into golden sunlight. A voice interrupts behind him. You missed it. Kwabena turns. Malik stands there, dust-covered and smiling Koba, trotting quietly at his feet. Missed what? Kwabena asks. The real moment, Malik says. The boy behind the stall. He reached for a chip, but didn't take it. His hand stopped mid-air. The light hit the grease on his fingers. Kwabena raises an eyebrow. And how do you know that? I saw it, Malik says. I took the picture. Kwabena looks around. With what? Malik taps his head. Right here. A small crowd gathers. They've seen this dance before. The boy who claims to shoot photos with his mind. Most laugh, a few whisper. Malik doesn't seem to notice. Kwabena crosses his arms. Okay then, he says. Let's play. He kneels slightly to be eye level. Tell me what happened here yesterday morning. Same spot, same time. Use your camera. Malik's face changes. Stillness, then focus. 42 a.m. The sun was lower, warmer tone. There was mist over the onions. Kwabena nods once. Go on. Malik closes his eyes, then begins not like someone making it up, but like someone recalling a scene printed on the backs of his eyelids. There was a woman in a green dress. She was arguing with the pepper seller. Her hands moved fast, but her left eye was watching a toddler beside her. He was playing with a plastic spoon. The light caught the spoon's handle. Reflection hit the chicken cage beside the yam. One rooster flinched. Motion blur. 2 feet stepped backward. Accidental choreography. The woman's voice rose. The toddler laughed. Framing foreground chaos, background symmetry. Silence. No one speaks. Even the vendors have stopped mid-sale. Kwabena's fingers slowly lower the camera hanging from his neck. Malik's voice drops into a whisper. And behind all that, on the left, a crippled man with no shoes leaned on a broken crutch. His eyes were closed, but he was smiling. Maybe because he heard the laughter. Maybe because it reminded him of something he lost. Maybe. Stop, Kwabena says barely above breath. The silence lingers like fog. Kwabena studies Malik's face, as if trying to see through skin into memory. Who taught you this? He finally asks. Malik shrugs. No one. Books? No. Practice? Malik tilts his head, puzzled. Look. Kwabena exhales, then looks down at Koba, who's resting his chin on Malik's bare foot, as if anchoring him to earth. Most people look, Kwabena says. You see. A murmur rustles through the crowd. Kwabena straightens, then lifts his camera. He points it not at Malik, but at the entire scene around them. Click, then another click. Then he lowers it. He walks over to Malik and gently hands him the Leica. Take one. Malik blinks. Now. Yes. I don't know how. Kwabena smiles faintly. But you already know what to see. Malik holds the camera like a newborn, awkward, terrified. He raises it. Everyone around them seems to freeze not by instruction, but instinct. There is reverence now. Malik closes one eye, breathes in. Kwabena whispers, don't wait for the moment. Just know it's already here. Malik presses the shutter. Click. The screen flashes black, then white, then fades into a single frame. The crowd watching light filtering through torn tarps. Koba's ears perked, and Malik's reflection caught faintly in a puddle between the fruit stalls. He lowers the camera slowly. It's not as clear as in my head, Malik says. Kwabena replies, maybe. But now the world can see it too. And just like that, the boy who never owned a camera had taken his first photo. And it was beautiful. The sky above Makola market shifts. Light softens as a cloud passes overhead, casting the stalls into a momentary hush of shade. It's quiet just for a second, and in that second something changes. Kwabena opens his satchel and pulls out a camera, old dented, the rubber grip worn down to its metal core. A veteran tool. He offers it to Malik. Try. Malik stares at it like it's alive. I don't know how. Kwabena shrugs, so I didn't either once. Malik hesitates. His fingers twitch. Koba sniffs the camera as if to ensure it's safe. Slowly, Malik reaches out. The weight of it surprises him. Real, cold, unforgiving. Nothing like the images in his head. He holds it backwards at first. The viewfinder is a mystery. His thumb grazes buttons he doesn't understand. The lens wobbles in his trembling grip. Kwabena watches silent, unreadable. Nearby, a hawker sings a lullaby to her child while selling oranges. The child rests on her back arms, curled in sleep. A beam of sunlight slashes through a torn tarp above, casting golden bars on the pavement. Malik squints. He raises the camera slowly, trying to align what he sees in the lens with what he sees in his mind. But it's clumsy. The angle's wrong. The framing feels off. His breath quickens. He lowers the camera, frustrated. "I can't. Keep looking," Kwabena says softly. And then chaos. Koba bolts from his side, darting between feet and fruit baskets, knocking over a stack of plantains. A loud bark echoes. Malik's head jerks up. Koba. The dog pushes through a crowd of feet toward the fruit hawker's stall. The child on her back has slipped down now, teetering close to the edge of the wooden crate she's tied to. The woman turns, fumbling. Koba jumps up, not attacking, but licking the child's hand, nudging him back towards safety. Gasps ring out. Vendors freeze. Malik, without thinking, lifts the camera. Instinct. Click. The world holds its breath. The image appears on the tiny flickering screen, the fruit vendor cradling her child, panic melting into relief. The boy's face soft with trust, his hand resting on Koba's wet muzzle. Behind them, light pierces through a woven basket of bananas, rays streaking in golden precision, highlighting sweat movement, breath life. Malik stares at the screen, stunned. I didn't frame it, he stammers. You saw it, Kwabena interrupts, stepping closer. Malik hands back the camera like it might burn him. Kwabena looks down at the photo. His face hardened by years of wars and widow's flickers for the first time. He doesn't say a word. Doesn't need to. He turns the screen toward Malik. That he says, voice low, isn't a mistake. That's memory in motion. People murmur around them, drawn to the screen like pilgrims. Malik shrinks a little. He doesn't know how to be looked at. Kwabena places a firm hand on his shoulder. "Come with me," he says. "Let me teach you what the rest of the world forgot." Malik hesitates. He looks at the camera. Then at the dog now wagging its tail beside the fruit stall, unaware it just saved a child's life. And then slowly, Malik lifts his hand. It's awkward, unsure. Kwabena grasps it tightly. A handshake. The first real one of his life. Malik doesn't smile, not exactly. But something shifts behind his eyes. A lens, focusing perhaps. The boy who once captured light in silence has now made his first imprint on the world. And the world, it seems, is finally ready to see him. The days that followed were unremarkable to the world, but for Malik, they were everything. He learned quickly. Not because he was taught well, but because he listened to the light. Because he believed in stillness. Kwabena didn't give lectures, he gave silence. He let Malik hold the camera, fumble with it, curse at it. But he never corrected him too soon. "You have to see before you know," he would say. And Malik saw, more than ever. He shot the spaces people stepped over, the faces others passed by. A trembling hand gripping the edge of a plastic chair. A child squatting by a gutter, laughing, though his shirt was torn and his belly bloated. A hen tied by the legs on a bed of weeds, watching the world with eyes wide, resigned. Malik found sorrow inside joy, and stillness inside chaos. Koba was always there. The dog seemed to know where the next image was waiting, nudging Malik down alleys no tourist would tread toward shadows where the most honest light lived. Sometimes Koba barked once and waited. And Malik would follow, camera in hand, heart in throat. And in those hidden corners, the lens caught stories no one else believed were worth telling. He never staged anything. He never asked for smiles. He just waited for the exact second when the world forgot to pretend. Soon the images started to circulate. Quietly at first, online posts, small mentions, curious whispers. Then one morning, over oily eggs and reheated kenki, Kwabena slammed a newspaper down on the kitchen table. The front page showed one of Malik's photos. A close-up of a woman hunched in prayer on a bus bench, a plastic rosary twisted tightly in her palm, a tear frozen mid-fall. Below it, an anonymous street photographer captures Akra's soul. No credit, no name. Quabena's jaw clenched. They used it, he growled. Without permission, without acknowledgement. Malik stared at the photo. He didn't speak. Quabena snapped. Do you care they stole from you? Malik looked up. They didn't steal it, he said quietly. They just didn't see who was holding the lens. Quabena stared at him, frustration brimming. You deserve to be named. I don't care about the name, Malik replied. I care if someone felt it. The night fell hard that day. They sat outside on the rooftop Accra, glittering in patches below. Distant music thumped through the air like a fading heartbeat. A generator coughed somewhere in the neighborhood. Malik held the camera on his lap. Koba slept beside him, ears twitching in a dream. Malik broke the silence. Why don't they see what I see? Quabena lit a cigarette. Took a drag. The ember burned orange against the dark. They're not blind. Malik continued. But when I show them the photo, they say, I never noticed that. Why not? Quabena didn't answer at first. Then he turned to Malik, because they've never lost what you lost. Malik didn't speak. Quabena's voice softened. When you've been emptied, Malik, really emptied, you learn to fill yourself with what remains. The small things. A laugh, a wrinkle, a shadow. Everyone else, they're still chasing what they think they need. Malik looked out at the city, his fingers tightening slightly around the camera. I don't want to forget how to see, he said. Then don't, Quabena replied. And don't let the world teach you otherwise. Below them, the city breathed. The lights blinked like stars, trying to remember how to shine. And in the dark, without flash or filter, Malik raised the camera and took another shot. Click! Just the quiet silhouette of a boy and a dog on a rooftop. But somehow it felt like the whole truth. The sun was cruel over Agbog Bloshi Market, a different rhythm than Makola, harsher, hotter, tighter. Malik walked alone this time, Koba trailing behind, limping slightly from a previous scuffle with a street cart. Malik was following light again, tracking the gleam that bounced off a tin basin filled with onions, watching the way a child's bare foot splashed through a muddy puddle. He raised the camera. Click. Framed. Honest. He didn't notice the stall owner staring. You thief! Malik turned too late. A man lunged at him, yanking his shoulder. A crowd stirred. Whispers turned into noise. I saw him take it. He stole that camera. That's not his look at his clothes. No way he owns that. Malik tried to speak, but the noise swallowed him. It's mine, he shouted. I didn't take this as mine. Someone threw a stone. It hit his back. A second one struck his arm. Blood bloomed. Koba barked, snarling, pushing between Malik and the crowd, his ribs taut, ready to bite. Another stone flew, grazing the dog's side. Koba yelped. Spun stood his ground. The market had turned into a storm of limbs and judgment. Fury fed by misunderstanding. Mob justice ignited by the spark of doubt. Malik stumbled, shielding the camera with his chest as people grabbed at him, kicking, spitting, accusing. Why would a street boy have something like that? Liar. Dirty thief. He fell to his knees. Koba leapt forward, teeth bared, biting the pant leg of one man who raised a stick. The man screamed and kicked the dog in the ribs. Another man hit Koba across the head with a broomstick. The dog collapsed, legs twitching, blood staining its fur. No, no, Malik screamed, crawling to Koba as fists tore at his shirt. Someone grabbed the camera, yanking it from his grip. It smashed onto the ground. Glass-cracked lens bent splinters of plastic like teeth across the dirt. Stop, Malik howled. That's mine, you're killing him. But no one listened. A blow struck his temple. The world spun sideways. Malik collapsed onto his side. His hand found Koba's body. The fur was warm, but still. The breathing shallow. The eyes half shut. Then a roar broke through the chaos. Enough, Quabena, shoving people aside like furniture fury in his bones. He saw Malik on the ground, the camera crushed blood on his face and shirt. He knelt, lifting the boy's head gently, brushing blood from his cheek. What did they do to you? Malik's voice cracked through choked sobs. They said, I stole it. Quabena looked up, voice razor sharp. He didn't steal anything. That camera is his. Given by me. He's my student. He's the reason you even feel anything when you look at your damn newspapers." He scooped up the broken device shards of Malik's trust still clinging to it. The crowd began to shift, hesitation, confusion, guilt inching in. Koba turned on them like a flame. "Is this what we've become? A city that punishes seeing too much?" But Malik wasn't listening anymore. He was cradling Koba's body, whispering his name. "Come on, boy, Bao. Stay. Please stay. You're all I have." Koba gave a soft groan, his paw twitching once against Malik's hand. The crowd melted away, leaving silence and wreckage. Koba stood behind Malik, helpless for the first time. He picked up the remains of the camera and placed them beside the boy. "Cameras break," he said quietly. "But your eyes never will." Malik didn't answer. He held Koba tighter, rocking gently on the blood-stained ground. And for the first time since he was a child in the rain, Malik cried. Not for the camera, not for the shame, but for the one living thing that had always seen him before anyone else dared to. The hearing took place in a dusty municipal room behind the district council office. The ceiling fans were broken. Sweat beaded down necks and foreheads. Muffled murmurs filled the air, thick with tension, old chairs creaking under anticipation. Malik sat in the back, silent. His left arm was bandaged, his eyes distant, withdrawn. Koba lay beside him, head on his paw, breathing slow. One leg now wrapped tightly in gauze. The stump beneath it was raw, freshly sewn. Every few minutes, Malik's fingers reached down to touch the fur just behind the dog's ear gently, like saying sorry. In the front stood Koba. His voice was sharp, calm but edged with fury. "The accusation is false," he said, holding up a printed photo in his hand. Malik's photo. "The camera is his. I gave it to him. And this?" He clicked a USB drive into the clerk's outdated projector setup. "Will tell you what he never did and what one of you did." The room darkened slightly as the screen flickered on. A slideshow began. Image 1, Malik standing beside Koba at Makola, holding the old camera timestamp in the lower corner 3 days before the incident. Murmurs, shuffling feet. Image 2. A shot taken the morning of the alleged theft, Malik photographing a group of children by a fruit stall. The timestamp 15 minutes before the incident. It was impossible for him to have stolen the camera when he was already using it. A woman in the audience covered her mouth. But Koba wasn't done. "One more," he said, almost a whisper. The third image blinked onto the screen. A man, one of Malik's accusers, was caught in the background of an older photo, blurry but unmistakable. His face partially turned, his hand reaching into another man's coat. Cash changing hands, unaware of the camera lens that happened to freeze the moment in time. Gasps. The man stood. "That's not me," Koba cut in. "Don't lie to this room like you lied to that market." The room fell into stunned silence. The magistrate leaned forward. "Is this boy able to speak on his own behalf?" All eyes turned to Malik. He stood slowly, eyes on the ground. His voice cracked. "I didn't steal anything. That was all, but it was enough." The judge looked toward the accusers, who now avoided his gaze. His ruling was swift. Malik Kwame is cleared of all accusations. The crowd's actions were unlawful. This court will forward notice of further review. The crowd outside the hall parted as Malik stepped out into sunlight. It was too bright. He blinked against it. Koba hobbled beside him, moving carefully on 3 legs, the fourth now gone forever. Reporters tried to snap photos. Someone shouted his name, but Malik ignored it all. He kneeled on the dirt, and he hugged Koba, tightly, fiercely, not with anger, not with regret, but with everything he had left inside. His tears came quietly, and no one mocked him. For once, they didn't see a street boy. They saw something else. A survivor, a witness, a boy who could freeze truth before anyone else knew it was there. Koba stood behind them, arms folded, expression unreadable. He finally stepped forward, placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, and whispered just loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "You don't just take pictures with your eyes. You see with your heart." And for the first time, the world believed it. It began with a wall, not a gallery, not a website, just an old cement wall behind a fish stall in Jamestown. Malik taped the first photograph there, a boy with polio crawling across a faded football field, smiling as if he were flying. By sunset, a second photo joined it. Then 5, then a dozen. His project had no press release, no sponsor, no catchy slogan. Just a handwritten title on charcoal-stained paper, the ones you don't see. He wandered Accra with Koba still limping but fiercely alert, capturing those too often swallowed by the background. A blind grandmother weaving mats with fingers scarred by time. A mute girl feeding stray cats behind a shut-down movie theater. A man missing both legs painting sunsets with only his mouth. Malik took no money. He refused staged poses. He spoke softly and waited sometimes for hours until the person forgot he was there. And when the shutter clicked, it was never just about the image. It was about saying, "I see you." Word spread. First on message boards, then among university students. Then to an editor at a small arts paper who ran a spread of the photos titled "His Lens, Our Blindness." The next week, Malik was invited to host an exhibition. A modest space in central Accra. The title he insisted on was simple: The Camera of Memory. The room was bare. No fancy lighting, no audio guides. Just prints pinned on rough plaster walls, some in color, most in black and white. Each photo had a note underneath, not a caption, but a piece of a story. Visitors walked slowly. Many didn't speak. A few wept. Koba stood in the corner watching as a little girl pointed to a photo and whispered to her mother, "That boy looks like me." Malik didn't mingle. He stayed outside. Camera hung across his chest, Koba at his feet. He didn't need to be in the center. He only ever wanted the light to fall on others. But then, on a humid Thursday afternoon, as Malik snapped shots of vendors near the edge of the Trotro Park, he saw him, a man hunched by a corrugated wall. Hans' calloused beard matted, eyes closed, a hat overturned in front of him with 2 coins inside. There was nothing unusual until the man lifted his head, and Malik froze. A scar above the right brow, a mole below the left ear, the exact 2 features Malik used to trace on his own face as a child, trying to remember the man from the last hug he ever got. His heart didn't beat faster. It just stopped. Malik didn't speak, didn't cry. He raised the camera. The man squinted but didn't flinch. The shutter fell. Click. It was not anger. It was not accusation. It was remembrance. A man lost long ago now returned as a stranger, made real again through a lens. The man lowered his head again. He did not recognize the boy before him. Or if he did, he chose not to show it. Malik didn't approach. He slipped a bottle of water near the man's side, then walked away. Koba followed. The leash wasn't necessary anymore. As they moved through the crowd, Malik whispered, "Even ghosts leave shadows if you look long enough." And behind him, under the noise of traffic and chatter, the camera of memory kept spinning. Quiet. Relentless. True. It happened without warning. A journalist from France visiting Accra for a separate piece on urbanization stumbled into Malik's exhibition by mistake. She stayed for 4 hours, then returned the next day, and the next. 3 weeks later, Le Monde ran a 2-page spread under the headline, "The Boy Who Never Needed a Camera." Photos filled the layout: the polio boy, the praying woman, the blind mat weaver. At the center was a single image in color. Malik barefoot standing in the rain, Koba beside him, camera slung across his chest like a second rib. A sidebar named him as a nominee for the Young Photojournalist Award of the Year, a prize that had launched careers across 5 continents. Koba brought him the newspaper creased and smudged. "You're famous now," he said. Malik read the article once, folded the paper, tucked it away. Fame wasn't something he feared. But he also didn't recognize it. Later that week, a letter came. Hand-delivered from the French embassy. An invitation, all expenses paid, flight to Paris, formal ceremony, chance to speak. Malik didn't reply. Instead, he picked up his old rucksack, placed a roll of black and white film into the pocket, and called Koba. They walked east. For days, they moved through the countryside down red dirt roads, past fields of cassava and maize, past children who had never seen a camera before. Children who didn't pose, didn't act, just lived. And Malik captured them. Barefoot boys holding handmade kites, girls drawing maps in the dust with their toes, a mother braiding her daughter's hair with thorns to keep it tight longer. He moved through the villages like a whisper, invisible, until the shutter clicked. In one shot, Malik kneeled in the dirt, holding Koba in his arms, while photographing a small boy crouched beneath a mango tree, his cheeks puffed with laughter and flies. The contrast in the photo would later stun critics, love holding sorrow, while beauty stared back. But Malik didn't take it for critics. He took it because it was real. A voiceover rises over the scene, an elder woman's voice, warm and worn. He never had a camera before he had his eyes. He never had a name before he knew how to remember. But when he saw you, you stayed seen. News of the international award kept growing. An editor from the BBC called, then a rep from National Geographic. A school in Berlin requested to name a classroom after him. Kwabena showed Malik the stack of emails. Malik just shook his head. "Will you go?" Kwabena asked. Malik looked out the window where Koba was barking at a rooster in the courtyard. "No." "Why?" "I don't take pictures for rooms full of people in suits. I take them for the ones no one remembers." He didn't refuse out of pride. It was a matter of alignment. His heart was not in auditoriums or speeches. It was in mud, in noise, in silence, in breath. So he sent only one thing to the award ceremony, a photograph. The girl with the chalkboard, her legs thin, her face serious, her fingers stained with charcoal. Below it, Malik scribbled on the back, "I photograph for those who were never framed in the first place." And though his name echoed through Paris, London, Toronto, Malik spent that week inside a one-room school in the Upper East region, teaching a boy how to hold a camera still enough to let a soul enter the frame. Fame came, but Malik didn't follow. He just kept walking, kept seeing. And every photo was a promise: you will not be forgotten. The building wasn't much, just a hollowed-out shipping container on the edge of Jamestown. Its walls painted with mismatched hands and faded slogans from old NGOs. But Malik saw a classroom, a dark room of the soul. He called it the Stillness House. There were no tuition fees, no entry exams, no fancy equipment. Only this rule painted on the door in chalk: you don't need a camera to be a photographer. Children came slowly at first. Word of mouth passed from one street corner to another. The first to arrive were barefoot. 3 had no parents. One girl carried a radio with no batteries, saying it helped her sleep. Another boy held a stone wrapped in cloth. He called it his only friend. And Malik began, not with shutter speeds, not with aperture, but with silence. He would lead them through the alleys of Accra at sunrise, past cracked gutters and crooked kiosks, and whisper, "Tell me what you see before you show me what you take." Each child was given an old disposable camera with only 6 shots. Some cried from the pressure. Others just stared at the sky. But over time, they saw. One boy photographed a mirror cracked in half, showing only half his own face. A girl snapped the way her shadow disappeared under an awning at noon. A child with no words captured a fly on a sleeping man's hand and the quiet it carried. And beside them always was Koba. He moved with determination now, 3-legged, slower, yes, but never far. He sat next to every child when they tried to frame a shot, as if watching over what they were about to preserve. One afternoon, clouds gathered over the city, and the children gathered inside the container for their first critique session. Malik pinned their prints to the walls with clothespins and string. No gallery lighting, no plaques. Just faces and corners and angles. Unfiltered, unvarnished. A small girl with a milky gaze and a cane tapped her way to the center. Her name was Esinam, 8 years old, blind from birth. Malik crouched next to her and said, "Do you want to see one?" She touched his face first, then reached for the nearest photo. "I can't," she whispered. Malik held her hand gently and said, "Then let me tell it to you." He began to describe it. A boy standing in the rain cupping a moth in his palms, water running down his nose, a torn yellow shirt. Behind him a blue bucket catching the sky. Esinam listened, eyes closed, lips parted. When he finished, she said softly, "Now I see it. I see it better than with eyes." Malik blinked and said the words he'd carried for years, but never spoken aloud. The camera is just a tool. The real film is the heart. Around them, the children were quiet. Some stared at their feet. Some wiped their noses on their sleeves. The air felt thick, not with sadness, but with the weight of being recognized. Later, when the sun returned, Malik walked with them through the back lanes again. Esanam held his elbow. Koba limped ahead, tail wagging. The other children whispered to each other about shadows, about light, about when to press the button, not how. That evening, one boy asked, "Sir, will these photos ever go to a museum?" Malik looked at him, then pointed at the street. "They already have, right there. That's the only wall they need." And the boy nodded, not fully understanding, but believing it anyway. By nightfall, the container was filled with more pictures taped to windows, hung from string laid on the floor in trails. They didn't hang in glass boxes. They hung in breath, in skin, in memory. And as Malik locked the door for the night, Koba curled beside him, and the boy who once shot images in his head stood in the doorway of something he had built not to prove himself, but to make sure no child would ever feel invisible again. The late afternoon spread across the city like a prayer. Hazy gold filtered through the dust, softening the edges of everything. The breeze carried the scent of charcoal fried yam and a quiet that didn't come often. Malik sat on the same concrete ledge where it had all begun, Corley Lagoon in the distance, barely breathing. The same rusted railing, the same chipped paint beneath his fingers. Koba lay beside him, head resting on Malik's foot, one leg missing, but no less whole. The shadows stretched across the water like reaching hands. A voice broke the silence. "Hey!" Malik looked up. A boy stood a few feet away. Maybe 9. Same dusty cheeks, same torn sandals Malik once wore. But there was something else. The stiffness of guilt still clinging to his shoulders. "I'm the one who used to call you crazy," the boy said. Malik didn't move, just waited. "I didn't mean it. I didn't know you were... I didn't see." The boy looked down, kicking at a stone. "I want to learn." Malik blinked slowly, then nodded once. The boy stepped forward. "I don't have a camera." Malik looked at the sun, low red, bleeding behind the line of rooftops. "You don't need one," he said. He pointed. "Take a picture of that. But use your memory first." The boy followed his gaze. "Just look at it. Really look. The color, the shape, the way the sky eats the light. Then close your eyes." The boy did. "What do you see?" Malik asked. "Orange, like fire, but soft, and something sad." Malik smiled. "Good." Koba huffed softly as if agreeing. Malik leaned back, his arms resting behind him. The boy sat beside him now, teacher and student past and future. And then the frame freezes, not literally, but in the way memory does when it decides not to let go. The screen begins to fade to black and white. An image begins to form. It's his first photograph, the one taken not with a camera, but with instinct. A sunbeam slicing through the Makola haze. A woman holding a child, half laughing. A tin basin of bananas. And at the edge, Koba tongue-out tail, mid-wag, caught in perfect stillness. And then, color bleeds into the frame. Soft at first, the yellow deepens. The skin tones bloom warm. The sun turns gold, then red, then fire. The child's laughter now almost audible. Koba's fur catching that final streak of light. Alive. The picture glows not because of the composition, but because of everything behind it. What it cost, what it saved, what it remembered. A voice returns Malik's older, now grounded like roots. Not everyone holding a camera can see. But Malik saw long before he had anything at all. Fade to black, and in that blackness one final flash, not of light, but of recognition. Of a boy who never needed proof to know something mattered. Of a man who taught others to see not with lenses, but with love.